Have you ever heard the phrase, "the victors write history"? Unfortunately, this statement rings true for the atrocities that occurred in the Nazi concentration camps during World War II, where countless women fell victim to heinous abuse. But what many don't know is that the abuse didn't stop with the end of the war. Today, we will delve into the sad truth about woman abuse in the Nazi concentration camps, examining the brutal assaults against German women by the Soviet, American, British, and French soldiers, and the psychological impact it had on the women who survived. During the last months of the Second World War, as the Nazi government faced increasing pressure from the Allies and the Red Army, chaos erupted as they invaded German territory. The end of the deadliest war in history was marked by immense suffering, particularly for the women of Germany, who fell victim to numerous assaults. While the Red Army was responsible for thousands of crimes against them, other Allied armies also committed similar atrocities. Following the atrocities committed by Soviet soldiers during the invasion of Germany, the surviving German population became fearful and began sheltering women. These women would hide during what they believed were hunting hours, when drunken Soviet soldiers would hunt for women as prey. However, it is not well known that American, British, and French soldiers also committed crimes against women. Much of the violence against women occurred during the invasion of the Third Reich. The soldiers believed they could act as they pleased, with the Soviets seeking revenge for the crimes committed against women in the Soviet Union during Operation Barbarossa. The first Soviet crimes occurred during the Battle of Romania and the Budapest Offensive. Estimates suggest that over 2 million women were subjected to horrific assaults, with the majority of these crimes occurring in the Soviet occupation zones. Shockingly, many women were repeatedly assaulted by men up to 70 times. Tragically, it is believed that 240,000 women died as a result of these assaults, leaving many struggling to cope with the aftermath. It's worth noting that there was no age limit for these attacks, with women up to the age of 80 being targeted. Sadly, it seems that even Stalin had a disgusting attitude toward these crimes. He appeared to suggest that soldiers who had endured the hardships of war were entitled to have fun with women without facing any questions or consequences. Even after the war ended, women in the occupation zones continued to suffer. Former Soviet officers admitted to targeting German women, claiming that there were not enough women to go around. As one officer put it, the entire population ran from the Soviet army, so they had no choice but to take young women. A woman telephone operator who served in the Soviet army stated, "I feel shame now, but I did not feel shame back then. We hated to see the Germans on damaged white houses. I wanted them to suffer. I wanted to see their tears." And another said, "You know very well we've come to Germany to take our revenge." Eyewitness accounts of the Battle of Berlin are haunting. They document the overwhelming attack by Soviet soldiers. In order to protect themselves, women made themselves look unattractive by smearing their faces with cold cream and covering their heads with rags. They hid together in the basement, shaking with fear, while some tried to catch a glimpse of the Soviet control of the streets. The sight of the wild and frightening soldiers left them paralyzed. The first Soviet orders were posted, which included a curfew. Suddenly, the sound of the Soviet soldiers demolishing a corner grocery store filled the air. The contents of the store, including bags of flour, sugar, and rice, were thrown into the streets, leaving the citizens to suffer hunger. The soldiers stood guard with their rifles, ensuring that no one could retrieve any of the urgently needed supplies. As night fell, some desperate people tried to salvage the spilled food. However, hunger became a major concern, as there was no hope of any supplies. Frontline Russian troops were said to have only targeted men, including the elderly and young boys. However, it was the second wave of soldiers who committed assault and plundering. They stripped homes of every possession, including toilets. Diseases were spreading rapidly among the German population during the aftermath of World War II. Unfortunately, many German women were not only verbally but also physically attacked by their own husbands, who accused them of engaging in relationships with Allied soldiers. As a result, some women lost their lives in the process. On the streets of Germany, women who had been sexually assaulted by enemy soldiers were often ridiculed by German soldiers. It wasn't only the Soviet soldiers who committed atrocities in Germany. An American historian estimated that approximately 11,000 sexual assaults were committed by American servicemen in Germany after the D-Day invasion. Many of these crimes were carried out by armed soldiers who used their weapons to intimidate their victims. Although there were policies in place that discouraged fraternization with German civilians, many Americans believed that they could converse with German women without any repercussions. According to an Australian who served with the American soldiers, assaults were committed by combat troops and those following in their footsteps. The extent of the assaults varied depending on the commanding officer's attitude towards such behavior. Although some offenders were identified and punished through court-martial, many more got away with their crimes. The Army legal branch was reluctant to admit that some soldiers had been shot for brutal or perverted offenses against German women, particularly if they happened to be black soldiers. However, many white American soldiers were also guilty of assaulting German women, with no action taken against them. During the war, American soldiers would force women into sexual situations at gunpoint, and some would even leave food as a twisted gift afterward. Similarly, British soldiers committed assaults, though these were investigated to a lesser extent due to the focus on dealing with deserters and mutiny-inspiring troublemakers. PTSD and drunkenness also contributed to some British soldiers committing crimes. There were also premeditated assaults, such as those on 3 women in 𝗧𝗏 and Rubenberg, as well as incidents in other villages. Some British officers were hesitant to punish their soldiers, leading to a lack of accountability. Hanover, which was in the British zone, saw lawlessness and anarchy, with soldiers and displaced people committing crimes and even killing German civilians in retaliation. During the invasion of Germany, French soldiers were also involved in large-scale atrocities, including the assault of French women. However, some French women fell in love with German officers and believed it was their best chance of survival. Nevertheless, many crimes were committed against women in the French occupation zones, with some claiming that French Moroccan troops behaved similarly to Soviet soldiers in Berlin. When the Allies and Red Army rampaged into Germany, they left a trail of horror against German women. Many Soviets believed it was sufficient revenge against the women who were massacred and mistreated by German soldiers earlier in the war. Shockingly, they saw the women of Berlin as a spoiling trophy of war. The crimes of the American, British, and French armies are not as well known, but they also committed terrifying acts against women. Many enemy fathers fathered thousands of children, and the women who endured the soldiers' ordeals could not live with themselves. This was a tragic consequence of the Second World War and a very dark side of the conflict. As we conclude our discussion on the sad truth about woman abuse in the Nazi concentration camps, it's important to remember the atrocities committed against innocent women during World War II. It's essential that we educate ourselves and future generations about the devastating consequences of war and the impact it has on women and their communities. Do you think enough has been done to address the issue of sexual violence during wartime? What steps can we take to prevent such crimes from happening again? Please share your thoughts about this in the comments section below. We look forward to reading your responses. Thank you for watching Historical Records Punishments. Don't forget to subscribe for more fascinating stories and facts about cruel and unusual punishments throughout history.